Well,
Okay.
and you have these other things like these isomers. I mean, some states don't allow them. Some states do allow them. I'm sure you've heard of the Delta 8 THCs that are out there. And this is a product of the Farm Bill, by the way. And I don't know if you know much about these isomers, is what they're called.
I've heard of them. I've heard of them, but you can explain it. Why don't you just, for those that don't know about them, why don't you explain what they are?
And you can use this graphic if you need to. So
Okay.
an isomer is a medical term for a molecule that has the same chemical makeup. So here you have delta 9 THC has 21 carbon atoms, has 30 hydrogen atoms, and 2 oxygen atoms. Delta 8 has the same molecular makeup.
You can pop that up if you from your end, Doc, if you want to right now.
You can see it. Can you see it?
Nope, not yet.
Oh, you can't? I thought, that's
okay.
my one. There you go.
There we go. Yep.
So you can see on this side, the Delta 8 and the Delta 9 have the same chemical formula. Just there's a little bit of difference of where the bond is in the kind of the 1, 2 o'clock position on the top right. There's a little double line there, but basically an isomer is the same, a molecule that has the same molecular formula. And these products are coming from federally legal hemp. So the Farm Bill that allows mass growing of cannabidiol or CBD, what they do is they can manipulate the molecule and create from federally legal hemp delta 8 THC, which is still THC. It's tetrahydrocannabinol, just has a little bit different than the delta 9 THC that most people are familiar with. So this comes directly from federally legal hemp. It was actually, pardon me, weaponized by the U.S. military in the 1940s because it eroded dogs' muscle coordination twice as much as conventional delta 9 THC. The people, even the industry reports the THCO, because then they can take the delta 8 THC and manipulate that molecule into the O acetate of THC, which is 3 times more potent than delta 9 or delta 8. It's not a naturally found cannabinoid. People that have taken THCO describe it like a trip, not unlike somebody who would go on after taking psychedelics. There's mislabeling issues on hemp delta 9 products. CBD is a precursor of THC in electronic cigarettes. So there's a lot of stuff in the space that is very concerning. There was a young child that died from delta 8 THC in Virginia, and his mother just got convicted of murder. So you can't tell people that marijuana's never killed anybody, because that's a complete fallacy.
Wow. So speaking of marijuana and the side effects, let's talk for a second. I know we've talked about it a little bit before, but let's talk about pregnant women that smoke marijuana. What's going to happen to their babies?
Oh, that's a topic of concern. And I think, in Colorado, 70% of dispensaries recommended women use during pregnancy. So, and that was a survey of 400. So a vast majority of dispensaries were using or recommending women use during first trimester. The substance abuse, the SAMHSA data that came out earlier this year shows that near daily use during total pregnancy has been on the rise over the past 7 or 8 years. So women are using this more commonly, more frequently. And the concern I have is that what happens to those developing babies that may be exposed in utero? And I use the Connecticut data because a lot of states aren't tracking this. So number one data point, women or dispensaries are recommending perhaps women use during pregnancy for nausea in the first trimester, which is a very critical period of development of a fetus. In Connecticut, they had on average about, I think it was 6.6 babies a day over just over 2 years. And most of those babies were exposed to marijuana much more than other things like opioids and alcohol. And then the ABCD study came out a couple of years ago following those children exposed to middle childhood, so between the ages of 9 and 11 years old. And what they were finding, compared to those similar babies that were not exposed, that those offspring had what was called psychopathology, that had problems with attention, thought, social interaction problems, and psychotic-like experiences. So we talked a little bit about what psychosis is. It's a kind of a spectrum. It's very complex. But children that are exposed in utero may actually develop psychotic-like experiences by the time they hit 10 years of age. So I did a literature search looking at, hey, you know, women use different stuff during pregnancy, like alcohol and other stuff. Is there any evidence of psychotic-like experiences in children exposed to those substances? And I couldn't find anything. It seems to be very unique to marijuana and cannabis. So in the National Institute of Health followed those kids into young adolescence and found that those problems persist. So we have babies that are exposed in utero, and what happens to them as they hit childhood and adolescence, they're having behavior problems, social interaction problems, problems with memory, attention, psychotic-like experiences, and that continues to go on. And this paper came out just earlier this year, just a couple months ago, June of 23. So what is the most common factor associated with early onset use or early initiation of cannabis? Was prenatal cannabis exposure. I was a little surprised, and that control for alcohol, tobacco, etc. And here's the graphic for that. If you can see the variables associated with early initiation of cannabis as children get into early adolescence, and the number one at the very top, you can see.
If you can pop it up, we can't see it right now. If you can pop it up,
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
My apologies.
No worries.
So let me get back to this. There you go. So let me go back here. So they followed up the ABCD study just a couple months ago, looking at that the largest risk factor for cannabis use initiation in early adolescence is having been exposed to cannabis in utero. Right?
Wow.
So here's the graphic. So if you look at all these other factors, you know, about the variables associated with cannabis initiation as children get into early adolescence, the most common variable is prenatal cannabis exposure, which is much higher than parent with drug or alcohol problems. You can see that, and you feel free to use this graphic as well if you're interested.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, they always blame the mom, you know, point the finger at the mom, but there's actually data that the father that's using may have an impact on the offspring's behavior, attention, etc. Earlier this year, you know, they had papers on early pregnancy exposure and adverse pregnancy outcomes, you know, small for gestational age, preterm birth, stillbirth, etc. And we know that babies that are born smaller may be at a higher risk for learning disabilities as they get older. Let's see, just a couple months ago, the perinatal cannabis use that kind of scoured the literature. And, you know, we know that women are using more during childbearing age, and cannabis use, again, another data point associated with preterm birth, low birth weight, and long-term neuropsychiatric outcomes. So use during pregnancy is dangerous. If it was any other medication, it'd probably be taken off the market.
Mm-hmm. I would bet. So let me ask you, what about secondhand smoke for parents that actually smoke marijuana, don't let their kids have it, but they smoke near them and they obviously breathe in the smoke? Any studies on that?
There are studies on secondhand smoke, and there can be some short-term cognitive impairment. They've done studies on animals like rats, and they've done some human studies that the exposure to secondhand smoke may impact you from a cognitive perspective, maybe short-term, maybe no long-term sequela from that. And I can tell you, I living in this community so long, I know a lot of people that are educators and they're principals at schools and elementary schools and middle schools and high schools. And the stories they tell me of children being driven to school by their parents that have the windows rolled up and ventilation's off, and the car door opens and a big cloud of marijuana smoke comes out of the car, and the children roll out of the car and then proceed to go to the class. I mean, it's just really scary to know that is actually happening on not a rare basis, at a very consistent and regular basis in the state of Colorado.
Wow, that is disturbing. So for people out there that are watching this, that are clearly being educated by what you're saying right now, what's your advice for people that, I mean, do you just say do everything you can to stay away from it and keep your kids away from it? What do you suggest to make sure they don't fall victim to becoming addicted to this stuff.
I think we need a massive educational campaign. I think what has happened is, from a societal perspective and sociology perspective, we have what's called social norming. The use of marijuana or cannabis has become normalized to the point where people are like, it's no big deal. So children are getting the message. They're seeing on social media advertisements for marijuana. They're seeing promotions that it's safe and it's herbal and it's medical. What's the harm? And that's kind of where I come into the picture, because I'm like, okay, well, time out. I don't care what people do with their home. I'm not a prohibitionist. I'm not a nihilist. I mean, the genie is out. I'm not trying to put the genie back. I'm just trying to educate my communities and my colleagues, even more importantly, because most medical providers have no idea what's happening. Like this paper that just came out just this last month, that there's a link to autism in prenatal exposure. Just came out. There's another one paper that just came out just this month that looking at animal studies that prenatal exposure has significant lifelong impacts on cognition. I mean, this is frightening data. I mean, what are we? And a lot of this is intergenerational. So, generation one has these problematic children and offspring. Even if those offspring don't use, those traits are sent to the following generation. So we are creating a generation or a new world order of dumb people, for lack of a better term, because they have cognitive problems, they have behavior problems. Why is this not getting out? And again, I'm not a prohibitionist, I'm not a nihilist, but I'm a scientist and an educator. And I'm saying, okay, guys, we have another substance that is creating harms like this, and tobacco and alcohol are not causing these long-term sequelae. That's my concern. And I hope to God I'm wrong, because if I'm wrong, I'll crawl under a rock and disappear. Nobody will remember who the hell I was, right? If I'm right, we're going to have serious problems in the next 20 to 30 years. And the light bulb is going to go on. It's going to take a high body count before people realize, well, maybe this wasn't a good idea after all. And I can't remember who the person was, but there's a famous quote that before you take fences down, you may want to think about why the fences were put up in the first place, right? I can't remember the quote. I don't know who the quote was from, but I think our forefathers might have a lot more insight than we give them credit for.
Looking at the impacts across the board on the damage this has done and is going to continue to do to our society, I hate to be paranoid, but it's almost like if I were another country that wanted to damage the United States, and especially the next generation of the United States, this is what I would put out there.
You know what? There's something to be said about that. I think that our country is somewhat under attack and doesn't even realize it. We have Chinese fentanyl flooding our country. We've got Mexican heroin and methamphetamine coming into our country. Russia actually is heavily invested in our marijuana industry. And I don't know if you remember that the whole Giuliani Ukraine thing that came out a couple of years ago. There was actually an article in the New York Times about how much money Russia is dumped into our U.S. marijuana economy. So what's the best way to control a population? And I think this came out of World War II. Make them stupid, right? Make them impaired. Remember the opium wars back in the East, in China. There were opium wars because they were trying to make people stupid. And I think this is the new era of the opium war. And it's not just marijuana. I mean, I think marijuana is part of the puzzle, but we got the fentanyl crisis. And interestingly, fentanyl death rates are higher in marijuana states than non-marijuana states. All these drugs play very well in the sandbox together. So it's not just marijuana. It's not just fentanyl. It's a mixed bag of all these drugs because they simply just do well with each other. And if you look at the other drug deaths that are occurring in Colorado and across the country, they also have gone up, correlating with more states legalizing for both medical and recreational purposes. So it's not helping our drug crisis. In my opinion, it's probably feeding our drug crisis.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but if somebody's driving, especially in a state like Colorado, where smoking marijuana or using marijuana is legalized, and a cop pulls somebody over because they see they're swerving a little bit, and they and they ask them to blow a breathalyzer, and they're clean. How do they determine about the marijuana content in their system?
Well, in Colorado, we have a per se limit of 5 nanograms per ml is considered impaired. The problem is that I think per se limits are kind of bogus because marijuana isn't metabolized like alcohol. So if you have somebody weaving across the road and you need what is called a DRE or drug recognition expert to determine and get trained to say, well, there's maybe another impairing substance on board. You look at the red eyes, you look at nystagmus or movement of the eyes. You have to have somebody that's very well trained to identify other types of impairment, not just alcohol. And then you have to go down the road of drawing blood, you need consent, all this other business. So by the time you get the level, it's very low compared to where they were probably at the time of the incident, either the running the red light or a traffic fatality, because they don't get the blood for several hours. And marijuana spikes in the blood within 30 to 40 minutes and then rapidly it tapers off. So by 4 to 6 hours later, there may be very little THC in the blood. Things that they need to do are, which is very expensive, is brain tissue, because that's where a lot of the THC resides, in fatty organs like the brain, or hair testing, which is probably more cost effective to see if they were a chronic marijuana user. You can do the follicle testing and hair testing to test for other sorts of drugs. But if you're doing the DUI roadside sobriety testing and they fail or they pass the alcohol, but they're still impaired, then you have to go down your laundry list to say, well, more likely not it's marijuana and less likely going to be like cocaine or PCP or something crazy like that. But when you get the test results, they may be falsely low. And that's kind of the problem, is it just doesn't work like alcohol. And in Colorado, people tend to use multiple things at the same time. So a lot of our DUIs that have gone up over the years, alcohol plus cannabis, that's kind of leading the pack rather than alcohol only or marijuana only. So it's a very complex drug world we live in today.
Yeah. Is there anything in the presentation that we didn't touch base on that you would like to talk about right now?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of stuff. Product integrity. I don't know if we didn't have a chance to talk about that. So you've got these are products sold in Colorado. Here's a hemp product sold at Safeway, and there's nothing on the label. This is about the equivalent of a capful of NyQuil, right? And so there's, I can't see how many cc's are in here. It's 30 cc's, so about the capful of NyQuil. And here's the certificate of analysis. That capful, the second line from the bottle, had 84 milligrams of THC, right? Where is it on the label? Nowhere. It's not on, and these are legal products. We have problems with contamination. Let me see. There's toxicity of CBD. Here's the marijuana, the audit from Oregon. There's a nationwide recall of marijuana products that had undeclared sildenafil or Viagra in it. And so that can cause some harm if an older person's taken this product and their blood pressure plummets. Recalls of fungus. We've had in Colorado arsenic. We've had cadmium, which is a heavy metal. And these are interesting because I think Colorado's trying very hard, and I give them a lot of credit for the try factor. But here you have a recall March of 2021. Doesn't hit the news, by the way, because although Ritz crackers and peanut butter and romaine lettuce are all over the news, but contaminated wheat doesn't get that level of attention. So here is a recall from March of 31st of 21, and they say return your products from November of 20 through January 21. Well, guess what? They're gone. There's yeast, there's mold, there's a nice web. I mean, again, I think that Colorado's trying to do a good job. You can see here, in April, there was 4 recalls of product, but nobody gets this. There's fungus, arsenic, cadmium in Colorado. We've got, here's the labs that are faking the data, the corruption, in the ex-Michigan House Speaker and the former Michigan Medical Marijuana Licensing Board was accepting bribes. He was, pay to play type thing. So the level of corruption here, you have Colorado inflating its potency just to make more money. The Oregon Secretary of State, she entered into agreement to provide consulting services for this cannabis dispensary chain. I mean, the money is too tempting. We have marijuana in the workplace issues. We've got all sorts of things. The environment. Nobody talks about the environmental impacts. Because we know that the poisons that end up in the groundwater and in the plants and in the food chain are there. They find products and animals that are dying in Northern California that are already endangered, and now they can't even see them anymore because they're dying because of the illegal activity in the what are called trespass grows. But the primary target organ is the brain, but the second one is the heart. People don't talk about the risk of heart attack, stroke, sudden death. One of my authors, Robert Page, who's a pharmacist from Denver, published the American Heart Association paper a couple years ago showing the potential cardiovascular effects of using cannabis. Medical users have a significantly higher risk of heart rhythm disorders like SVT or supraventricular tachycardia, PACs, non-sustained VTAC. We know that there's cardiovascular effects. 1/3, and these are young users, 1/3 are more likely to develop coronary artery disease at a young age. This came from the American College of Cardiology. I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. I'm just kind of putting it all together. Just a couple months ago, marijuana users have a higher risk of peripheral artery disease, nearly 4 times greater than that of non-users. So when you have peripheral artery disease, that can lead to amputations, and people this is like 600,000 people that they looked at. These are not small studies. Cancers, we have abuse and fatality in children. The most common substance in the state of Texas, which represents about 10% of our country's population. When there's a dead child from abuse or neglect, marijuana seems to be at the dance more than number 2, which is nothing, then followed by the usual suspects. We've got these are grows from Denver. Why are the officers wearing hazmat suits? Because they don't know what chemicals are on these plants. There's a chemical called mycobutanol, which is an antifungal agent to keep the aspergillus from growing on the plant. But when you heat mycobutanol, it turns into cyanide. We've got, and I poached these from my DEA colleagues. These are pictures from home grows. I mean, they're doing ventilation. There's mold issues in Northern California. All those little white dots represent a probable illegal hemp or marijuana grow with no permits for building, no permits for water. These are the bait dogs they're using at these trespass grows. There's dead animals everywhere in Northern California, miles and miles of irrigation tubing. Salmon don't spawn in some of these streams anymore because they're just taking the water to feed their plants, which can take anywhere from 8 to 12 gallons per plant per day of water. Carbofuran, which is a banned pesticide, is found at nearly 100% of the grows in California. They've got booby traps, snare wires. They're helicoptering trash and irrigation tubing out of Oregon. The Dolan fire killed a firefighter, was intentionally set by an illegal marijuana grower. 10 homes, $62 million. So let's do, a lot of the state leaders I talked to, I asked them, can you spell P&L? They always talk about how much money they're going to make and how much it's going to help their financial problems. I mean, here's this one data point in the L column, the loss columns, 62 million from one large 125,000 acre fire in the state of California. Here in Colorado, we're number 1 in the nation on motor vehicle thefts, second for crimes against property. We've here in El Paso County, since you lived here, this is very interesting data point. I don't know what to make of it, but I find it very interesting. If you look at the number of medical marijuana patients in the entire state, look at El Paso County. We don't have recreational weed. We've got medical, and we have by far the most number of medical patients that live in Colorado Springs and in El Paso County. But look at the driving fatality data. El Paso County lights up. Look at the suicide data. El Paso County lights up. Look at the homicide data. El Paso County lights up. I don't know what to make of that, but I find it very fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Clearly, without question. Well, Doc, clearly this is a wake-up call. I mean, it's not a wake-up call. You painted a very clear picture that people need to see, and lots of people are going to be watching this. And I think the more they get out of this, the more they're going to share it. And I think it's great information that people need to know about. And I'm going to be back in touch with you because I want to do more in-depth TV story and expose, if that's okay.
But and I apologize for all the doom and gloom, but I just try to, you have to look at it this way. Because again, not everybody that uses marijuana has become a problem person. But even if the percentages remain the same, say it's like 1%, and you have 100 people using, well, one person is going to be a problem. But then you've got 10,000 or 100,000 people using, and it's still 1%, you're going to have 1,000 people that are going to be a problem, right? I mean, it's just simple math.
Yep.
And I think what I was alluding to earlier with this massive education campaign, we have to reverse the social norming of use of marijuana, because we did it with tobacco and it was pretty successful, right?
Yeah.
And El Paso, Texas, it is having a huge problem in the number of kids that are vaping marijuana products. It's really become a cultural and societal problem from a public health and safety perspective, which is very concerning to me and my colleagues, and it's probably the reason we do what we do.
Understood. Doc, thank you so much for your time.
All right, always happy to help. You guys have a good night.
You too.